There are all sorts of different algorithms that you can use for predictive analytics. There's, logistic regression and survival analysis. One of the most popular ones, decision trees. I'll explain what they are in a second, but they're popular because they're not that hard to use. So someone who maybe isn't a statistician could actually make use of a decision tree. I'll give you an example of how you use a decision tree. So, say you're a telecommunications company, and you want to understand customers that are going to disconnect your service. So you've collected a whole bunch of data, thousands and thousands and thousands of rows of data about customers, and you have all of these attributes about the customers. And so what you do is what your outcome variable is. They call it a target variable in the decision tree. It's either going to be that they disconnect or they stick with you. So there's two outcomes, 1 and 0, disconnect or stay with you. And you have all of these attributes, demographic information about your customers, about, how much they spent, what services they had, what their usage patterns were what their usage was over time, whatever you can gather about them. And then you take half of, say you take a couple thousand rows of that's called your training sample, and you put that into the decision tree. And out pops something that looks like a tree with sort of branches, and at the top is sort of everyone, and then it branches off, and it says if customer has been with company, longer than 5 years, because that was an attribute, length of time, and they spend more than $50 a month, they're not going to disconnect with a probability of 85%. So you can actually read down the tree and come up with a rule. If the customer has been with me more than 5 years and they're spending more than $50 a month, there's a high probability that they're not going to disconnect. Likewise, you come up with a bunch of rules, for the flip side of it. And so that's your training set. Then what you want to do is it's easy to come up with something when you know the outcomes, but how well does it work on an untested sample? So then you supply your test data to it, and you see how well the decision tree works on data that you didn't train it on, basically. And so then you can come up with these rules, and then you can start to operationalize, the rules, because if you start to know that, these are the characteristics of the people that are going to disconnect, these are the characteristics of the people that aren't going to disconnect, you can gear your programs accordingly. So, that's I think one example, a decision tree, which is pretty popular now among people that are using predictive analytics.